will give the concluding remarks of this webinar. The second guest and speaker will be Shada Islam, who is the Director of Europe and Geopolitics at Friends of Europe in Brussels, and who also happens to be a close friend of DOC as a member of the Program Council. The third speaker is also a close ally and partner, Mr. Suresh Prabhu, who is a special advisor to the Prime Minister of India and also the Sherpa for the G20 for India. He has served as a prominent minister in the last government of Prime Minister Modi. So as you can see, these are in a way, very different perspective, very different geographical perspective. So today we will be looking at the geopolitical impact of the crisis. And when we mention this question, many questions arise and many questions are coming to the surface. To what extent, if and how the coronavirus crisis will impact the world order, if and how it will exacerbate the tension or the rivalry between the US and China, if and how it will eventually weaken or even destroy or dismantle international or multilateral cooperation, or eventually it will be some sort of a wake-up call and a time for a reset. So there are plenty of questions that are arising. The perspective, in a way, is quite bleak. And I would like just to summarize, maybe the spirit and the fear, and that maybe would be the first question that I will ask you. This morning, in an interview, the French Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jean-Yves Le Drian, when asked about how the new world will be looking like, said the world after the coronavirus will look like the world before, but even in worse. So do you agree with this? What are your, in a way, scenario about the coronavirus post-world? I will be giving to each of our three guests 6 minutes approximately for an initial statement, and then we will have about 60 minutes or 50 minutes for questions coming from all of our participants. I see that we have 120 participants connected. Please, if you want to ask questions as of now, you just click on the chat icon, and I will start collecting and compiling the questions. So don't hesitate to start asking questions, making comments that I will put forward and convey to the speakers. But for now, I'm happy to give the floor first to Dr. Wang. Thank you.
Thank you, John Christopher and Dr. Yakuning and distinguished panelists. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, friends and participants. And so it's really a great honor to participate in your great webinar. What I can see actually now is that we are talking about global pandemic, but I think that this pandemic has never been seen in the history of mankind, of such magnitude, of such death and such devastating impacts, because that was never happened in terms of giving diseases like that, the scope of impact in the world. So I think the globalization is facing unprecedented challenges. We are living a turbulent time, and we are now, a global villagers living on the Earth planet. We are facing attack from Mars. How we can really protect ourselves is really fundamental. So this is really unprecedented for all the history of mankind. What I think that really bothers us now is that after the globalization of last 70 years of UN history and WTO, World Bank, and all the Bretton Woods product, what's going to be left after this coronavirus? So what I think now is that we are facing either or. Either we go down with the coronavirus, or we really thrive on this coronavirus because of the new reshape and rebirth of reintegrate, innovative of the new global system. So here I'd like to really propose or maybe make several observations. First, I think that globalization will continue. Deglobalization is really a danger for all of us. And we can see that deglobalization is populism, nationalism is swept around the world. And we have governments actually using that as well. So I think we have to be really careful of this deglobalization movement. But I think that globalization will continue because through this coronavirus, we have never realized that we are now in the same planet. We're in the global. We're all global villagers. We're in the same boat. Our destinies are connected. We cannot separate each other. Nobody's island. No country is an island. So we have to live together and work together and fight together for our survival of the human mankind. And then the humanity will prevail. So that's my opposition number one. Number two is that we will have to really, stimulate the trade because given the history of the First World War or Second World War, it was also the financial crisis or 9/11. It was the trade that really lifted the world out of the woods. So again, we need to really build up these, strengthen the global value chain that we already have. Right now, I think the global value chain is under enormous challenge. We are facing decoupling. We are facing, the movement of the people has been stopped, and tourism has stopped. So that really a great danger to our humankind. So I think what we have to do is we have to maintain the global value chain, and we cannot decouple from each other. We really have to work with the spirit of cooperation, so that we can really, have the G20, have the really working together, and we should have all the countries fight together, and then have a more coordinated approach. We cannot let multilateralism fail us. So this is really important that we have to really work on it. Otherwise, we're going to see a miserable war probably ahead of us. My third observation is that we should really now give a bit more tolerance, give a bit more, it's not the end of the history, as Fukuyama-san just said. I think that we have to, really have all the other countries have their unique way of fighting this coronavirus. We should share our experience, but we should not impose our values to others. I think, after all, we will see no country is perfect, and even for China, for example, this time they were the first country to suffer from this coronavirus, but also they probably is the first country to get out of this virus, and they did quite a decent job in terms of containing it. So I think that after this we'll have to see that the way, the experience, the governance model they have, maybe have some merits to in tackling this kind of a gigantic threat to the mankind. And as China lifted 800 million poverty, as China become the largest trading nation for 120 countries, China could help more. China could really, really on this coronavirus fighting, supporting all the other countries and shared experience and learn from others as well. My final observation is that I think we should really forget about those geopolitical, differences. Really focus on, how we can save lives, how we can save the livelihood of the mankind. And the most important, I think we should really also strengthen the global public health governance at now and also in the future. If anything else, this time has reminded us that global governance of public health for the mankind is so important. This is something new. I think we have never learned from. We are now learning from this crisis. So I think we need to really strengthen the global governance for the public health, and we should really strengthen the trade. We should really strengthen the WTO, strengthen the World Bank, IMF, all the infrastructure, AIB, and things like that. So the international organization should play more important role. WHO should be strengthened, should be more supportive. I think we can always improve. We can always doing better. We can always do better. But I think we should not stop. Stop the multilateral support for fighting this disease. So in another, in the one note, I think I want to conclude now that everybody, all the countries are good friends. China is really willing to learn from others, and we are willing to support. We are really sharing one common earth. We are sharing our own future together. So I want to just
thank you, Henry. And now I'm giving the floor immediately to Shada Islam.
Thank you very much, Jean-Christophe. Hello, everyone. Hello from Brussels. It's a nice spring day. Jean-Christophe, I'm cautiously optimistic. I read also with great interest what the French foreign minister said about how we will come out of this worse than we are now. I don't see how that can happen. We're really, really down at the moment. And I'm really hoping that this will be a transformative moment. We're living through very, very emergency measures at the moment. I'm in lockdown here in Brussels. We're not really sure when the lockdown will be eased. I think working from home for the last 5 weeks, actually, doing okay, but working from home. It's a different environment. So we're living through 3 kinds of emergencies simultaneously, and that obviously makes us a little bit cautious and grim at the moment. First of all, of course, is the COVID-19 emergency, which is really, as you said, Henry, a global pandemic, and is showing the fragilities of the health sectors, not just in the developing world, but also in our developed world here in Europe and the United States. So there's the health emergency. There is an economic crisis underway. Millions of people are out of work. Even more will be out of work as we come out of the lockdown. We need more fiscal space for governments. We need emergency rescue packages for developing countries. And the big danger is that this big disruption that we're living through will turn into a big depression. And the IMF head, Kristalina Georgieva, has said so. And third is what you said, Jean-Christophe, we're living through a geopolitical emergency as well. US-China relations are really toxic, acrimonious. We're engaging in blame games. And instead of working together, as Henry has said, we are actually not working together. We're trying to hamper international collaboration. And this is having a big impact in our hunt for the vaccine, in coming to the help of countries that need medical personnel, need protective outerwear, need masks. So we really need to get our act together. This is a moment for all hands on deck. And that is not happening for one simple reason. We are engaged in all kinds of geopolitical, great power competition. At this time, this is not the game to play. This is a moment to come together. And as Henry has said, there are several ways we can do this. Now, as the Second World War was ending, wise leaders from across the world came together and had what we call the Bretton Woods moment, a moment where we decided no more wars. We were going to work together to build a better world through multilateral organizations. Now, what do we have at the moment? You know how interesting that the United Nations Security Council has not been able to meet to talk about this. They tried, but it did not work out. The WTO is fragilized because of competition between the US and China, the trade and tech war. We have the WHO, which is getting all kinds of criticism for being too close to China, for not being independent enough. So we have multilateral organizations that are fragilized. We have leaders across the world that are more into the populist game of winning elections or winning over public opinion than really caring for their nationals. We have a global infrastructure for health which is extremely fragilized. And we have countries in South Asia, in Africa, that are really warning now that they need their debt to be forgiven. They need rescue packages. Millions of people are out of work. And what are we doing at the moment? We're just engaging in blame games and propaganda wars. I think that is not the way forward. My final point, Jean-Christophe, really is that we have to start thinking about the future, about the economic future, about the recovery. And there, once again, we need to work together. Economic nationalism will not lead to increased trade or investments. Putting up barriers, putting up export barriers or import barriers is going to dampen and deaden the economy even further. So we really need to get our act together now to start thinking, how are we going to have a global recovery plan? Who's going to be doing what and in what speed and when? Thank you.
Thank you, Shada. I mean, I take from both of you a very strong call for strengthening and developing multilateral cooperation. I'm curious to know if from an Indian perspective, you share those views. I also keep, this notion of the Bretton Woods moment, and maybe that could be one of the outcome of those discussions is how to revive this flame, how to revive this sort of visionary leadership that is needed to in this post crisis. But first, I mean, Suresh, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. As we are entering a very interesting phase of human life, which at least our generation has never seen before, and I don't think even past generations have experienced anything of this kind. We talk about Great Depression, we talk about World War, but I don't think anybody has really experienced anything of this kind. Even the World War has not affected as many countries as the coronavirus has affected. Therefore, it is truly a different kind of a global phenomena which we have to deal with. And as it happens, we can stop the war when the ammunition gets over. We can stop the war when the statesmen think that we need not go ahead with this. But it is a kind of war which we cannot stop by just be wishing it to be stopped. It is something, the force of nature, which is now unleashed, which is causing so much of damage, and everybody is struggling to find an answer to this. So in a situation like this, obviously we need a global response, while at the same time we need local action. The global response is necessary because we are learning from each other. What happened in one other country, people are trying to use it as a data to determine the policy actions and policy options that we have in front of the other country which is going to face the next crisis. So we need global cooperation, and the global cooperation must be transcending into areas beyond health, because once we address this issue, and I'm sure some medication, some vaccine which will be developed will be able to address it. But the aftermath of this is going to be as important, as crucial, and as more challenging, like the economic cost, the social cost. To deal with that, we obviously need, again, a very good global cooperation and global integration, global action. To do that, we need institutions. Now, we have seen that some institutions were already under pressure even before the COVID-19. The WTO is facing existential crisis. United Nations is not as effective as it should be. So we really need institutions which will be really dealing with this type of situation in future. So we probably, after the war, after the last World War, we thought about institutions, Bretton Woods institutions. I think now we'll have to come together to find out the efficacy of the institutions and how to make them modern, how to make them relevant to today's times, how to make them stronger, more effective. So we'll have to deal with that. While we do all this, luckily, there is an institution, if not an institution, a platform called G20. And I'm very happy to see that G20 took this leadership. The Prime Minister of India, I can speak, had actually went and talked about global response that is necessary to deal with COVID, as well as the response that is necessary to deal with economic consequences that will follow as a result of this. So therefore, we need definitely institution, but at least we have a platform, which is just 20 countries, but which represents 86% of the global GDP. These are the countries in different parts of the world, and therefore they have a geographical reach to deal with a situation that will emerge out of this. So I think we must focus on finding out how we build institutions to deal with situation like this. We need early warning system. If something like this is going to happen, if pandemic was going to be around, as was probably foreseen by some other experts, why we couldn't act on it earlier is something as a global community. So world global institutions, global community must introspect, find out, and work in a way that we really resolve these issues in a proper manner. The point is, the humanity, whether we like it or not, are actually integrated, far more integrated than any time in the past. It's not just the markets are integrated. but societies are also integrated in some form or other. The technology has made it possible that whatever happens in very far remote part of the world gets into your drawing room the same moment. So therefore, the societies are now, we are feeling the pain of a faraway crisis. So we are integrated emotionally, socially, if not necessarily economically and politically that much. So therefore, we must find out how to deal with human crisis of this nature, of this magnitude, of this kind, and what kind of a response we should think about it. So I really welcome this initiative. I know my dear friend Bas, who has been doing this great job for many, many years to bring communities and societies together. I am sure we'll work together to make sure that we avert the future crisis. We deal with the aftermath of this present crisis in a way that will reduce the pain of as many people as possible, and particularly the most vulnerable people in the poorer countries of the world. So thank you very much for the opportunity. As I requested you earlier, I need to leave, but I was very happy to participate in this program, and I'm really looking forward to working with such distinguished people who are part of this community. I can see so many of them joining in from different parts of the world. That itself is a strength that despite a crisis, we want to get together to address this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Prabhu. Thank you for your statement and analysis, and we very much regret actually that you have to leave, but we have taken good account of what you told us, and so we will continue the discussion. Hopefully you can take part in a further event to the discussion. It's indeed very important also to remind that DOC, the Dialogue of Civilization Institute, has very strong roots and cooperation with India, and very pleased to work with the India Foundation that you are running together with other leaders. So thanks a lot. And so maybe we can start now the discussion. We have plenty of questions coming from many parts of the world. Actually, there are lots of questions, Dr. Wong, about how this crisis will affect also the Belt and Road Initiative, but also more broadly speaking, let's say, China's outwards development.
Thank you, John Christopher. I thought so. I shared all the previous speakers a lot of views that it's really we are facing this common threat. I think for China now that the globalization will be accelerated. I don't think we're going to slow it down, because one of the things I do think that going to impact though is this global value chain will suffer temporarily. I think because of the slowing down of the transportation, airlines, and everything, people-to-people movement. But this will be temporarily. But I think once we get over this coronavirus, probably once we had vaccine developed, we'll really catch up, and we have some really much faster, much more stronger development. I think for China one of the good reasons that China can survive this coronavirus crisis, probably until now it's doing relatively better, is precisely China has all this great infrastructure. China has very good roads. China has a very good telecommunication, big data. For example, that China has a pinpoint where is the effects, the cases are, where whether you are safe or not just by scanning your mobile, and then you can tell you are highly risk or not risk or really free to work. So that's really important. So I think that also infrastructure-wise as well, 5G and all this technology. So what I think that the Belt and Road Initiative that China has initiated several years ago will of course continue, but probably more focused now, but more focused on those life-saving, more health-related, more public, safety infrastructure, and more on the telecommunication. For example, China has developed technology now that they can screen your long picture on computer just by a remote doctor can see that very well. So I'm thinking of a Belt and Road will not be stopped, I'm sure. But also we can see how developing countries are really will be benefiting from this initiative. And also, we would like to propose, at least from our think tank point of view, that World Bank and ADB, AFDB, all the international development banks, plus AIIB, should work together on Belt and Road. So we should have international consortia for some of the common identified projects, or have a kind of a system so that we can multiplize Belt and Road. It's just not only China initiative. Let's make it a global initiative. I think also after coronavirus, the world is lacking stimulus, lacking a big project. And I think Belt and Road can provide a good opportunity for the future project to stimulate a world out of this great recession that's caused by coronavirus.
Does that mean that, in your views, the Belt and Road could become some sort of the Marshall Plan of the coronavirus post-crisis?
I would not say. Well, Marshall Plan probably have a similar function, but Marshall Plan is a big, massive stimulating plan, investment plan to revive the world after the Second World War, revive, rebuild, reconstruct the world. So I think the Belt and Road already had quite a good foundation there. Let's focus a bit more now on Belt and Road, and then let's have a more international cooperation, participation from all the international agencies, international companies, multinationals, particularly international lending agencies. So if they can really work together, I think infrastructure revolution and infrastructure stimulus would be a major way getting out of this crisis. From China's experience, like in 2008, China has a 4 trillion RMB stimulus package, largely on the infrastructure. Actually, CCG, we have conducted recently a few webinars on new infrastructure, which will talk about 5G, telecommunication, big data, all those software online, and e-commerce, digital delivery, and all those things. So those new infrastructure are really needed to fight this coronavirus, and that will be for sure for the future stimulus recovery plan for the world if this rightly implemented.
Thank you, Henry. Question now for Shada. One of them is coming from Dr. Frendo, who is a former Minister of Foreign Affairs in Malta, asking about can you assess the reaction from the EU? There are lots of talks that the EU was slow to reply, slow and in a way has failed to express solidarity among member states. There are also quite a few questions that in a way would be for both of you about this also rising issue or concern regarding democracy, human rights, and the traceability or the trackability with all those discussions that are revolving around this. So could you give us element of response about that?
Thank you, Jean-Christophe. Yes, very, very willingly. I'll talk about Europe. But before I do that, I think I'd like to just come back to a number of things that Henry and Prabhu spoke about as well, if you allow, just to give my side of the picture. So I think we have to be very careful when we talk just about the Belt and Road initiative. This is not the only connectivity plan in the world today. It is an important one. It's got the most financial heft behind it. We all agree about that. And I think Henry made a point when he said, if it's done in the right manner, and I think there are lessons that China can learn from its past experience over the last 6 years on how to improve the BRI projects, how to be more transparent, how to be more aware of social implications, how to involve domestic civil societies in it. And I think, financial accountability, all of those things, if China's Belt and Road Initiative does evolve and becomes more of a multilateral initiative rather than China-centered, then I think we are on the right path. But as I was saying, it's not the Marshall Plan. The BRI is loans, it's not grants, it's not the Marshall Plan. And there are other connectivity projects around the world, which I think are equally valid and equally valuable in this post-COVID-19 phase, especially. And Japan has its connectivity projects, the European Union has its projects, ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And I do agree with you, Henry, and Friends of Europe has been saying this for some time. We need to multilateralize. We need to bring these connectivity projects, which are going in all kinds of different directions, lots of duplication, lots of wastage, bring them under one banner and have a kind of advisory body or a plurilateral agreement where we can actually define the norms and standards that are needed for connectivity. So if we agree to do that, and this is beyond the BRI, I think we are on the right path. I'm also wary when people, and I have to say a lot of male people, talk about the COVID-19 and a war against this pandemic. We're not talking about a war. There will be no winners and losers. We're talking about a global humanitarian, economic, geopolitical effort where we're working together. I think war metaphors really are not appropriate for this very, very important and moment where we need to work together. When we talk in terms of war, winners and losers, that's not the way the world is going to evolve. That's, I think, 20th century thinking. And I would wish that our leaders would change their conversation, would change their language when dealing with issues of such major sensitivity. And finally, before I turn to Europe, China's role in the recovery is going to be primordial. And this is why this talk of decoupling the economies and disrupting global supply chains. I mean, how are we going to rebuild these devastated economies, including in South Asia and Africa, if we're not going to be working together to remove barriers, not to reimpose them? And what's very dangerous at the moment, including in Europe, is this economic nationalism. Even with the export of medical equipment and outerwear and masks, there have been import restrictions, export restrictions. Countries have not been able to extend a hand until very, very recently. So I think we need to really transform the way we think, and the way we act will come with it. And so I would really appeal to everyone to start thinking more in terms of a global, collective, collaborative effort rather than a war that has to be won somehow. This pandemic will go away. There will be others around the corner. What we have to do is reinforce our structures so that we can cope and become not just resilient, but transformative in how we deal with these crises. Now, Europe, I have said so, and we are really hopeful that having learned the lessons of the first few weeks where we were slow in responding to what was happening in China, in Asia, we saw what was happening in China, and we did not take the necessary precautions. Our governments, our national leaders were really a little slow, if I could say that modestly, very, very slow in responding. And it was only very late into the journey of the pandemic, if you like, that Europe really woke up and started going into its own measures. And as I said, I'm in lockdown. Most of Europe is in lockdown. Now we're thinking of coming out of the lockdown. And solidarity between European countries has not been very, very strong. I agree with the foreign minister of Malta, the former foreign minister, when he says it's been a poor show of solidarity. Our governments have not acted as one, as a union. Initially, I think one can understand that. Nation states have to act quickly because they are responsible, the governments are responsible to citizens, and citizens go to the government and ask for appropriate action and policies. So the first stage, I think, okay, fine, you have nation states and national leaders working, but beggar thy neighbor policies were not the right ones. Now we're seeing a change. We're seeing some elements of solidarity coming into the picture. We're seeing the European Union institutions in Brussels taking charge, however much they can, because health, is not an EU competency. So I think Europe is learning. And I think Corona will either kill, as a colleague of mine has said, Giles Merritt, will either kill Europe or cure Europe. And I'm really hoping, as the French foreign minister has said, that Europe will find its leadership destiny at this very, very important moment.
Thank you, Shada. We are talking a lot about, or you are both actually calling for more international cooperation, more multilateral agreements. This is very nice. I think many people agree, but these are words. And how can we move from words to action, or move from words to commitment? We have two interesting questions. One, which is in a way an opportunity to give some sort of immediate evidence of a willingness to cooperate. And this is coming from Bertrand Lachapelle, who is the CEO of Internet and Jurisdiction, which is a global NGO, we're saying, interestingly, that actually the retreat on national border has, in a way, justified, or the lockdown. I mean, that there was no cooperation, no consultation among countries to decide the time and the modalities of the lockdown. When it comes to release the confinement, and wouldn't be making sense to have some sort of international cooperation, or at least consultation, to get out of the confinement? Because it seems that for now that we have entered the lockdown and we are leaving the lockdown only with a national perspective, which look quite odd. The second question, talking about possibility or opportunity to, in a way, to move from words to commitment, is, as many of us know, this year is the 75th anniversary of the creation of the United Nations. In the initial plan, and I understand this is still the case, on September 21st, the head of state from around the world are supposed to convene and to converge to New York to launch a big call for a new international cooperation at the occasion of the 75th anniversary. That was the plan before the crisis. The question coming from Alexander Rahr, who is in Germany, is to say, isn't it the time? I mean, when Shada, you mentioned before this sort of Bretton Woods moment, is this summit, could be eventually the time for a new peaceful world order call, like it was after the Vienna Congress in 1815, or the Versailles Treaty after World War I, or the Yalta Agreement after World War II. Would there be a way, and if and how, to make it happening, that this head of state summit could be actually the rebound or the reset for a new multilateral framework perspective? So these are two questions for both of you.
Henry, go first.
Oh, thank you, Shada. Yes. Well, I think that, as a matter of fact, I agree with you, Jean-Christopher, that the world should really have a more multilateral approach. And so this is the only time, probably, I mean, in modern history, we have a 911. I think the world is really coordinated anti-terrorism. We have the 2008 financial crisis. The world is really coordinated, stimulate the world economy. This time is the time that we really haven't seen any, a very concerted government coordination. We have seen, of course, there's one G20 virtual meeting has happened, but it was not really any very substance has been carried out. So I would really think that even for lockdown or unlockdown, we should really have a better coordination. But not only that, we seem to have only the World Health Organization is doing this kind of coordination at maximum. But then this has also been under threat because the funding is under threat. So really, I really felt that we should really put politics aside and then concentrate on working together, particularly after this crisis or during this crisis. We build up our global public health, global governance system. And this is absolutely the most important job we should do. So this is the recommendation I can give. I think I understand that the G7 is having meetings probably every month, but why can't G20 have a meeting every month? Why can't WHO calls for international health minister meetings every week? I mean, we should have better coordinating efforts on that. You are right. I mean, even national security of the UN can't hold one meeting. How can we really coordinate the world together? So this is really something we politicians probably of all countries should think alike and then put the safety and the health of the mankind in first place. Second, on your question about UN 75th anniversary, I agree with you that we are now really chaotic situation without coordination. Every country does its own conferences and things like that. So the world economy is going down the hill, and then we probably have a much large casualties on the in addition to the pandemic crisis. So what I think is that I think United Nations Security Council should immediately have meetings. UN General Assembly should have its virtual meetings as well. G20 should have a regular meeting. Trade ministers and health ministers should meet immediately, and then also like think tanks and should also work together, put different proposals. So it's really with concerted efforts of every country and also NGOs, people to people friendly, twin cities, provinces should all really work together. We need an all-level, multi-level approach. I think that's the way to get out. But I think I still pin hope to the UN because after all, this is the only product that we have after Second World War, and then this is the only thing that really coordinates the world. We should safeguard it, we should uphold it, we should strengthen it, innovate it, and improve it.
Jean-Christophe, I wish that would be the case. In September, I wish, Henry, you and people who hope for some defining moment will be there. But when I talk about a Bretton Woods moment, I'm not just talking about the politicians we have today. There is a general lack of wisdom. It's my country first policies, and the September meeting will be just before the United States elections in November, presidential elections as well. So when we have at the moment really a leaderless world, which can be a good thing, a leaderless world, if other people can, sort of work together, as Henry is suggesting, that would be brilliant. But at the moment, we do have a vacuum. Europe, could fill the breach that has been left by the United States, but doesn't really have the solidarity within and the unity within to take that spot now. It could happen in a few months or years, but at the moment, we are lacking the heft we need, the financial heft, but also the political heft at the moment. But I think what we will have to do is come together and revise the way we operate. Now, some of the things that Henry has said are very important. For instance, we focus a lot on states, and we talk a lot about great power competition. But as we're seeing in today's world, dealing with COVID-19 is bringing together countries that have actually small countries that are not considered the world's great powers. I'm talking about New Zealand, Korea, I'm talking about Taiwan. Hong Kong is doing a good job as well. So the focus is not just on how US, China, or Europe are handling things. Germany is doing rather well as well here in Europe. So there are countries that have the potential to come out and work together, but they're being sort of sidelined by the great power competition games that our politicians are playing, but also I have to say our media is playing as well. So I'm hopeful that there will be a revision in people's minds about the importance of states. If you look at the United States, for example, how the governors of states are standing up to some of the rather ridiculous instructions, if you like, that are coming from Washington. You look at cities across the world. Cities are proving that they are in the hands of very capable mayors who are often in disagreement with the nationalist politicians. So we are seeing power that is being used in a different manner. And that's where I think the Bretton Woods moment will have to come from pressure from below on leaders, which are not just national leaders, but also perhaps state leaders. If I may just also come back to the questions on democracy and human rights. And this is one of the things, that is, I think, of great shame at the moment, that many politicians across the world are using COVID-19 emergency to extend their authoritarian powers, to curb on the media, crack down even further on the media, and also against dissidents. And I think civil society dissidents, etc. So I think this has become a bit of a smokescreen for the nationalist instincts that exist among many of the leaders. And I'm not pointing a finger at any one country. I think this is a tendency we see in the West, just as we do in parts of Asia and Africa and Latin America as well. And finally, your point about exit strategies, and you're absolutely right. We went into the lockdowns in a rather ad hoc, chaotic, confused manner. Could we come out of it in a more coherent and consistent manner, at least across Europe and other parts of the world. I fear that that's not going to be the case either. The European Union has been trying very hard to come up with a unified or consistent policy for exit strategies across Europe, and it's proving very difficult. And I can understand why, because the national situation in every country, the health capacity of the hospitals, the search for masks, etc., is very different across different European countries. So national leaders will not take instructions from Europe. What they can do and what they should be doing more and more is exchanging information, coordinating with each other, and telling each other what they will be doing. So I think that's the way we'll have to do it, more through information exchange, learning from each other, best practice exchange, rather than doing it simultaneously. That, I think, is unfortunately not going to be possible.
Lots of questions also about the blaming game, the war on information. Lots of concern also to see that there's some sort of an escalation of the mutual suspicion. On one hand, saying that the virus is coming out from a laboratory from Wuhan. On other hands, people saying that there is some sort of a mask diplomacy that is irritating. So, we see week after week an escalation of tensions, bitterness that could very well lead to some sort of a call for retaliation if we don't manage to mitigate or to, let's say, keep the debate at the proper level. And how would you see this issue? How can we prevent this escalation on the war on information, on mutual suspicion, and how can we bring people together under the tent? And again, I mean, what we need is not just words, but what are the actionable mechanisms or levers, to mitigate those risks?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that John Christopher, that the human beings, actually, we should really look forward. This is very unfortunate that we have this pandemic and the coronavirus that hit at humankind, and then China was very unfortunate also to be hit at as the first country. But China did its best. Since I think they find some trace of that in December, and then they immediately the National Health Commission sent down the expert team, and then they immediately reported, and then they immediately started to lock down the city. So by January, the whole city of 10 million people has been locked down. The whole province of 60 million has been locked down. All those lockdowns also unprecedented in the history of mankind. Was also a very risky movement for China to take. But China take the bold action to do that, even at a big sacrifice of the personal freedom, and of course also the productivity and the production. So, but I think so China has actually also in the first place conduct reported the WHO, and then released the sequential of the virus genes, and then to the outside world. So China did I think its best. Of course, this is the only thing never happened before. People have a learning curve. There's probably one case or the other that maybe a little slowness in coming up to the response, but not China was not deliberate. So all this conspiracy theory, I found that ridiculous. I mean, I see that the U.S. CDC director speak at the White House and say, this is coming from after analyze the genes of the virus, it's coming from some kind of animal, and they are very sure of that. So the scientific community should come to conclusions rather than the politicians. So I think that what we are doing, I think right now the most important is really looking forward. So now China is getting out of this for months or two now. Probably still have a few cases daily, and Europe and the US and many other countries also approaching the end of their lockdown, probably with another weeks or months probably just to finish that. So the challenge now remains: how can we revive the world? What are the experience, even with some kind of a little threat of the coronavirus? How we can revive? How we can back to normal? How we can really rebuild the value chain and rebuild confidence, rebuild the industry that facing bankruptcy and crisis. That's another thing coming up. So we should really compare notes and learn from each other how we can better revive the economy. I mean, that's the thing that should be in all the government's mind. I think that China experience was shared. China has locked down cities. China has built up temporary hospitals. China has have a social distance. Now it's widely practiced, because China gone through that. China successfully contained that, and a lot of countries has also used the China experience. But I think now what we are trying to do is really how we can avoid this going down of the world economy. According to WTO, this year GDP could shrink by 1/3 or even more. And so how can we come back, not losing more lives of the economy? So that's the most important thing. I think we should all work together on that.
Jean-Christophe, this pandemic has brought out the worst in us, but also the best in us. I mean, the best, we know what is happening, individual, collective, group solidarity, people going out to help each other, people connecting online, people helping the elderly. So it's really bringing out the best in many of us, a sense of solidarity among citizens and civil society that sometimes our national leaders are not showing. But it's also bringing out the worst in us. And I have to say, one of the saddest things is not just the authoritarian creep that I talked about a minute ago, but also these conspiracy theories, this battle of narratives, this allegations of mass diplomacy on one side, and you started it first, no, you did it first. Politicians of huge countries, the so-called great powers, actually behaving like children in a playground. And I think even with no adults in the room to stop them from doing that, because that is making us feel very, very vulnerable. Now, conspiracy theories abound in times of unpredictability, in dangerous, risky times when people are feeling very vulnerable. We're all locked down, we're all online all the time, going on the internet, trying to find out what's happening to ourselves, to our neighbors, to our countries, to the world. And these conspiracy theories are thriving in that atmosphere of vulnerability, of fragilized individuals and communities. People are looking for simple answers, and simple answers are provided by conspiracy theorists, but not just them, by politicians who've been saying to us for months and months, don't listen to the experts. We know better than them. Throughout Brexit debate in the UK, the experts were treated like trash. They were not important. It was just the politicians. And what are we learning now? We are learning that the experts, in this case, health experts, are the people we should be listening to. It's not like people like you and me, even. It's the health experts. They know what they're talking about. They know where it originated. They know how to deal with it. And their voices are not being heard. Instead, we're listening over and over again to the same voices calling on blame games and finger wagging. Nobody comes out of this looking pristine. Nobody comes out of it looking like a saint. We're all, I'm sorry to say this, but every single politician that I've heard in recent times, except for a few, and many of them have been female, I have to say, coming back to the gender issue here, which I insist on, and many of them have sounded more like bully boys than as national leaders.
I think the time is coming now also to hear from Dr. Yakunin, who is the chairman of Dialogue of Civilization Institute, to share his views, his perspective, and also his reaction on this debate. We have plenty of other questions, and I'm sorry for those of you, who have not been able to, to convey the question. We will hopefully be able to get back to you with a response. We are collecting all those questions. But before we turn to Dr. Yakunin, I'd like to ask you one other question that is coming quite often also about, let's say, the North-South gap. Evidently, the rich countries will be able to, in a way, absorb or digest the crisis from an economic perspective. We see here and there tremendous rescue plans, and that in a way will help the transition or to ease, let's say, the economic recovery. But for some countries where there is absolutely no, let's say, reserve and no capacity to absorb economically, isn't it a risk of a real chaos, an economic chaos, but also a security chaos, with a possible agenda from some groups, to take this opportunity to destabilize those countries, and that we would be heading towards an even more, let's say, unbalanced world? I think this is quite an important issue. We don't know yet exactly what will happen in the next few days or weeks in some part of the poorest countries in the world. But do you see that as a major threat? And how do you see this as an opportunity or a possibility to respond very quickly?
Shada first.
Yes, so I think absolutely right, Jean-Christophe. Inequalities have to be dealt with within our Europe, within our West, between the richer segments of our society and the poorer segments, between the gig economy and the sort of strong economy led by the banks. All of these inequalities have to be settled, have to be eased. And you're right that we in the West, with our fiscal space and our stimulus that we're being allowed to use now, rather than the austerity measures that have brought us to our knees in many, many countries of Europe, those are going to help us. Now we have to look outwards and see how we can help others, not because we're being generous, because if the world does not develop and grow, we will have no export markets. As simple as that. So we need to help the Africa, the South Asias, and the Latin Americas of this world. And I see two ways of doing it. One is through debt forgiveness. Debt that has been accumulating over the years in these countries is choking them to death. Many countries, they're going into austerity, they're going into lockdown, and their daily wage earners cannot even eat. So they're going to be dying from hunger and famine, and not from corona, or both, So we need to think beyond our borders. We need to bring in a little bit of humanity into our thinking. So the first thing is debt forgiveness. And when we talk in Europe of a basic income for our European and Western citizens, we should also think of a basic income for the rest of the world. It can be done. Studies prove that it can be done. It's not free money. People who get basic income, guaranteed income, monthly, weekly, they use it for good reason. So we have to, and this is going to be crucial, because the terrorism, the security threats that you mentioned will come also from increased poverty and hunger in many parts of the world. So we have to think about the world as being really, really interconnected. If we want security in Europe, we need to help Africa. It's as simple as that. We have to help Africa grow and develop as it was doing before it was hit by these terrible, terrible lockdowns, which are necessary. I'm not saying they're not, but this is having an enormous disastrous impact on African economies. And there, I have to turn to you, Henry. China has a role to play. China is a big partner in Africa. China should be forgiving African debt. BRI is loans, not grants. Your help in Africa comes with some strings attached. So, you will have to start easing and loosening those restrictions and conditionalities as well, as we will in Europe have to do as well. So this is really part of our story. North-South cleavages cannot go on. The North will not survive if the South does not.
Yeah, I think you have raised some good points. And what I can see is that there are probably three things we could do to do that, because as we all know that we are one world. I mean, just Lady Gaga, as your show has demonstrated that. It reminds me of the African famine in the 80s that. We are the world. So I think that basically, so all the countries who have those well-to-do, maybe relatively well-to-do, getting out of this crisis first, should start to aid, support these developing countries. For example, China is sending many medical teams, some medical supplies and equipment to some of those developing countries to help them fight the coronavirus. And that should be do as much as we can, as often as we can. So this should be encouraged for all countries. Second, I think that multilateralism should be strengthened. Like an organization like WHO should be really empowered and should be really, give more resources, should really helping those countries to guide them to go through the crisis. And their funding should be supported. I'm really thankful for Bill Gates Foundation to donate $150 million US dollar to the WHO so that WHO can function. It's very important for developing countries to have that. Finally, I think also the NGOs, all the other, all social fabric, all the social forces should be working together, should really starting to help. So we should really have this humanitarian spirit, not only for the government, but for the whole society, all sectors, all walks of life, that we should all put together to help these developing countries. If we are surviving, we should really help each other. As we all know that no country, no man is a safe island. We all depend on each other, and so their future is our future. So we have to work together.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you, actually, for this extremely rich and also very frank discussion. The time now is coming to turn to Dr. Yakunin to share his perspective. Just let me mention two information. One is next week on April 29th, we will have the third seminar, part of this the global pandemic, the way forward, and we will be looking this time next week on the implication or impact on society, way of life, culture, and civilization. So this will be, of course, another very interesting exchange with speakers from different parts of the world, from Russia, from India, from Europe, and so please register for this. One last piece of information, because we have mentioned several times the United Nations and the summit in September. The Dialogue of Civilization Institute has launched last week a global consultation on the future of international cooperation and the future of the UN. You can find all information on the website, and so we are asking people from all around the world to contribute ideas about how to improve, how to reform, how to reinvent the United Nations that we need in this very specific context. So this is time also for everyone to voice their concern, to voice their views, and we have already received hundreds of feedback from all around the world, and we're very keen in a way and working very closely with the Secretary General's office in a very privileged way to contribute the feedback and input at the time of the UN declaration by the head of state. So thanks again, and I'm very happy to turn to Dr. Yakunin, the founder of DOC and the chairman of the board.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Jean-Christophe. After all this additional information, it is difficult to, to collect the minds concerning the discussion, but I would like to praise the efforts of our speakers during this webinar. And I also was following the questions which could not be answered, all of them, but I will pick up with something, to my mind, very essential to this webinar. This is webinar of DOC Research Institute, Dialogue of Civilization Research Institute. And we are proud to state that through the history of Dialogue of Civilization, whether it was World Public Forum or DOC, we were always promoting the ideas of solidarity and equality of the nations and civilizations. What we are talking, or not only us, many experts are talking now about lack of solidarity, lack of, equality. I'm not going to give some examples of a dramatic scale when inside Europe, some country can close the border and stop the, shipment of medical equipment. Shada, you know that better than myself. And this is not reflection of solidarity at all. So we can continue that. But instead, we need to concentrate on the basic values which promote the idea of solidarity, equality, and development of new relations. To my mind, what we were talking today is the fact that we already are living in somewhat different world. It is not the world after pandemic. We are already in this new world. And it is absolutely high time to consider. Shada, I was shocked. You said exactly what I was meant to say. Can you imagine that me permitted a kid to the locomotive driver's seat to drive the train? It is not possible. And you are referring to the leaders of the world as the children playing in the kindergarten. How comes? We never permitted to drive the train. We never permitted a kid to make a surgery, but we are permitting somebody to drive the entire world to where? So to my mind, the answer to the question whether this meeting of global leaders will be fruitful or not depends on the ability of even this generation of the politician to understand their responsibility. They cannot do much, but at least they can do something. And we need the change of the generation of politicians to see the actual fruits of that. This is first remark. Second, I suppose even in this dramatic period of time, and even judging by some questions, I should say that we are still stuck in the frame of ideologized politics. You agree? Because, I can give you, I made some research while you were, delivering your speeches. For example, index of democracy, and Norway is 987, while United States even 7.96, Russia is 311, and Iran 238. And somebody in the questions challenged that democratic countries were dealing with the crisis, COVID crisis, better than others. It is not true. Irrespective of east or west, south or north, this virus hit the population dramatically. And if we consider the results, or actual, not results, but nowadays situation, we can see that Iran is hit very dramatically. But Iran was deprived to buy medical shipment to help their people. I'm not, discussing why, but that is sanctions. While the best, example of democratic country, United States of America, are suffering tremendous losses of lives. So it is not democracy, autocracy, or something like that. That is the quality of political system as a whole. And we should understand that just trying to close our eyes, not to recognize this, we will never find the way how to face future challenges which humanity will have in front of it. And some very important to my mind conclusion, because of your beautiful remarks, I suppose that institutions, not only politicians, appeared not able to tackle this crisis properly. And this is the lesson we should learn immediately. Then, reasonable and very serious experts like you, I'm mentioning Kissinger and William Hague, they were talking about solidarity, they were talking about this kind of activity. That were old-style politicians. Why the younger politicians, younger generations, are not able to see the substance of the difficulties? Because they were taught like that. And that is the problem of education, not only political education, but as a whole, education system. So, you know, since the virus is not tackled yet, I suppose we will see more dramatic development in the world, even now. And I think that what you were talking about helping each other, necessity of solidarity, it should become the essence of global politics nowadays. We are talking about globalization, and Professor Wang assured us that globalization will continue. But may I say, it should be absolutely different type of globalization. Not globalization of domination, but globalization of solidarity in front of the enemy, which is dangerous to entire humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yakunin, for those words of also wisdom. And I think it is very reassuring that you and our guest speaker have been, in a way, very strong in their call for strengthening, developing, intensifying all mechanisms for cooperation. This will be probably the key priority in the months to come, and this will be also the responsibility for everyone. Indeed, this is one other major, let's say, call or lessons from this exchange, is that this is not just the matter of government and official voices, but this is now the responsibility of everyone. And I'd like just to remind what we had a very interesting discussion a few weeks ago by the new Program Council of the Dialogue of Civilization Institute. And there was a very strong voice, to call for a new internationalism or a new supranationalism. This is a unique moment in time where indeed we can go one route or one other, and the future of humanity will be very affected by the way we have the capacity to mobilize resources and energy. So thanks a lot, and we certainly want to continue the conversation with you, Shada, and you, Henry, and also with all of our guests. We still have more than 110 people, so we have lost only 10 after 75 minutes, which I think shows that you have managed to get their attention. Once again, apologies for those who have not received responses, but we will get back to you. And keep in mind, our rendezvous next week on the 29th for the third of this webinar series. Thanks again to our guests and to our audience, and we'll be in touch very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.